Before I continue relating about my scrying and contemplating with the book before you, I think I should include in the video that for the first session, I saw a flash of light from this direction outside afterwards. And the second had it from this direction. During the pentagram rite, there was a light purple wire mesh that went through here. With the first set of vibrations, I smelt Hollywood from my right and Turkey from my left. With the second, I saw a violet glow come forth from the glass. In the final scrying, a similar thing happened, but the color varied from violet to deep purple. Then there was a darkness that obscured the north. Then, inside of the glass, there was a ring of orange flames that almost filled the bowl. I felt like something moved upon me. In the final reading, there was a sense, a peculiar warmth and power. And in the final scrying, the euphoria came down me, loosening me up, leaving me a tingle. Down is about not knowing what is going on a different level in the middle of the night. Saul of Tarsus talks of him as a usurper. Storm at the farm window reminds us that we can witness things, and we don't know if they're going to hit us. But then, they don't. So we can be grateful for that, right? Black Horse Lane reminds us that feelings and such can stir up among the repressed in a way not expected, right? So many people think you just, okay, here's the line. As long as you don't cross the line, you need to go over here, It's like, no, that's not how it works. Is that anything over there that you realize can point towards there, that can get you there, and you don't know which doors you can open, right? And I'm not necessarily talking about sin either, because I'm not going to say that somebody is sinful because they had a feeling or they had an emotion. But these things aren't just one thing either, right? Return reminds us about decisions. Decisions that are out of pride and how they can separate us from others. Incubus makes him sound like some sort of psychic vampire, doesn't it? The Hills of May. Remind us of like when it's not too difficult at night, it's not too hot, not too warm. So certain things become more inviting. And with those individuals, it may not be something that lasts. That may not be the point. The Coronation Murder reminds us that even at times where things seem safe politically, they're not, and that people can and probably should comfort themselves by the reference to religion. Of course, it would be better if they regarded their religious sources before they make such actions. Whipper-Guinea reminds us of how cartomancy works. Because a lot of things started as games, and they had meaning attached to them. Like tarot wasn't a thing where people shuffled decks of cards and told people's future and stuff for a while, at least not on record, like hundreds of years. And a lot of other things too. They form some sort of meaning. The bedpost reminds us that it's not just children that want bedtime stories. Of course, nowadays, we got television. I may have no one to tell my stories and relate about books if things get too bad in society, but a lover since childhood can be put in a different context. It is important to kind of think sometimes, okay, how can things go back? Sure, we have ideals and other stuff we want, but it's like, why give up on the friendship that you can have because you want something that you, usually don't have, right? But some things happen, but if a couple of people can go back to the relationship they had on, the good terms that they had, why not just ignore the other stuff or try to not let it go by? I mean, some things are so serious that, you have to totally disassociate, but that's different than what I think he's talking about. Song of Contrariety is the whole cold feet phenomena. Of course, when a person gets married, it shouldn't be just so they can get married. I mean, even if it's a duty, it should be more than just, to cross that check on the list. Love and barrenness makes us think of, what if there is no more than what we see before us? Well, that's still a victory. It's still a continuance. Song in Winter reminds me of the emotions of the season, as you could say. The dark quarter of the year, fear. The cooling quarter, hate. The bright quarter, love. The warming quarter, hope. Well, what if outside of that you have hope for otherwise? Or you're just passing the time, trying to enjoy yourself regardless of, the outer cycles of things. Unicorn and the white doe kind of reminds me of what the unicorn symbolism has become. Not just something of little girls and stuffed toys. I think it's usually girls that like the unicorns. Or pull floaties, or whatever the thing is. It's become something of pride and showing off. And this is sort of what the poem alludes to, is that the difference between nature and what people have propped up for themselves. Sullen moods reminds us to keep it real. Angry Samson, well, Gaza is still well-walled, isn't it? Children of Darkness is about not being a child anymore, and sometimes feeling like you have to go in secret to realize that. And of course, that often turns to amorality. Immorality might be actually more common with that, but it's to the point of not caring what the morality is about it. You just go about it. Isn't that the greater evil? Richard Roe and John Doe reminds us of the sort of thing that goes on in the grimoires, doesn't it? That you bring up the heroes of the past or the prophets and stuff like this, and you aspire towards that, or you mention it as part of your authority. The dialecticians reminds us that we do need to vary our approaches and just, get into our art. The Land of Whipperguinea gets us into the whole idea of a friendly game, and again, connecting it to various things outside of the game. Christmas Eve is to know or to not know, but to take part. The snake and the bull reminds us of the whole personification of Thoth, or the talk about Thoth having an ape. The Red Ribbon Dream reminds us that there are signals that will connect things to reality. Some of these poems seem to have had missing lines or words or whatever, because there's that lines of stars thing in the middle of some of these poems. Or perhaps that's where the page was in earlier printing. In Procession reminds us, as we go to sleep or meditate or whatever, our memories and conceptions and such of life process. Henry and Mary are about how relationships are, right? That you're this in the relationship, you're this in the relationship. It doesn't matter what others think of us. This is just the sides of the relationship that we take. And English Wood talks about the despiritualized existence and how you do have to live the stripped down existence. Sometimes you don't have the wise men or the mythical beast, and it's not part of your world. What did I dream? Well, that's probably the case with most people. Me, I think that a lot too. It's like, I'm sure I dreamed something, whatever, and sometimes have a sense of it. That's like, I just have no idea what it is. But it seems today that most people don't remember any of their dreams. It's not that they get piecemeal stuff in it here and there, and it works together, particularly if you keep a notebook and that sort of stuff. Interlude on preserving a poetical formula. Well, a poetical formula, you do need to leave the feeling, right? But you do need to organize things with your thinking. Epitaph on an unfortunate artist. Well, just because you have an art doesn't mean that it takes care of the rest of your life or rest of existence. If you can take care of yourself in the physical sense, maybe you're not taking care of yourself in the eternal sense. A history of peace kind of gets us to the idea that, when we make it about our particular political system, rather than realize politics as a tool, then, it's never totally going to last. It's, or it's never going to totally be accomplished, is it? The Rock Below reminds us that there are things out there that may have features that aren't, agreeable, but if you look at it from a certain angle, well, it's all good. An Adele of old age connects us to the old myth of Zeus. And, well, even that pictures some limitations of age, right? Of course, that's stretched out in a seemingly unfathomable amount of time, but they do talk about that. But, in your old age, you can still rehearse. Lord Chamberlain tells of a famous meeting. Kind of makes us think of how ultimately these rulers, or the real rulers, they can get together. They fight things out through the people. They play games through the people, but, like literally in the middle of what you think is nuclear war, they have it set up so the rulers of Russia and China and America and all that can still give each other phone calls. And it's like, there's something not directly honest about our perception there if that's how things are set up, right? They just presume that they'll still be able to talk. I mean, it's just not as friendly as that. It's not presented that way, but you know what I mean. The sewing basket does remind us of how life used to be back before you just picked up another piece of not going to last very long at whatever store or whatever. You tried to figure out how to patch things, and you collected things to patch later, and every guy has a jar or drawer of screws and little nuts and stuff like that. The thing that goes around a screw, and little parts like that to get things done. Which is why most of us have drawers with something of super glue or something like stuck on it, or the thing broke open, and against clock and compasses. You don't have to say stuff against time and space and matter and all that. But it is important to live beyond definitions sometimes. That the definitions are against you, but you still go on. You don't have to suffer. The Avengers talks about a Western impetus that the Bible sort of prophesies against, right? There's still this, now it's, the people of Gaza, the people of Lebanon, they're still facing it, There's still, walls around Gaza, Of course, this time it's not so much defensive, but to keep them from having resources. And it's obviously not necessary to attack Gaza and the West Bank and Iran and all that. The poet's birth can come through wealth, through faint or unusual experience. It can come through terror, but in a way we have multiple births. Some paths don't talk about it that way, but we have multiple births in life. The technique of perfection is a gradually working on yourself, your response to what is, what has been. The Sibyl witnesses the strangeness and connects the cycles of migratory birds and nature and in general towards some sort of meaning or purpose. A crusader is about how maybe the best crusade is against ourselves. A new portrait of Judith of Bethulia reminds us that what is projected as a good example, according to some cultures, isn't necessarily a good example. Like, a lot of people have twisted things, like with this taqiyya thing. It's like, taqiyya is having regard to the situation. It's not blaming those who are tortured or threatened or whatever to save their bodies, to save their lives. that, even if they said something that's not true, that it's on the people who are mistreating them. So, in general, it's just having regard to the situation. So it's not that you preemptively lie, oh, they're of a different religion, they're of a different nation, etc., etc. Maybe doing things that wouldn't be right. I mean, people think, oh, well, law enforcement, you need to be a prostitute, you need to use some drugs, it's like, listen, that's not the right way about law enforcement. And, of course, the drug problem's getting worse, isn't it? The prostitution problems and the worst problems associated with those things, are they getting better? No, they're getting worse. Because even the law enforcement's involved in it. Well, not all the law enforcement. I'm not making claims about any particular group or individual, but you all aware of these entrapment agents and all these people. A reversal reminds us that this silly thing where, oh, it's not my fault, I was seduced, and it's like, well, it's a two-person decision, right? And a decision over time, oh, I shouldn't, and oh, I really shouldn't, that sort of lack of responsibility needs to stop now, doesn't it? So life sometimes overruns principles. So the reward and the control system both need to be addressed. The martyred decadence, a sympathetic satire. The artist removes the barriers. They step aside from usual conceptions of relations. On Christopher Marlowe reminds us that certain themes, like we see in the Bible, repeat themselves in modern people. A village feud probably has more meaning than just talking about a magnolia tree. But perhaps part of the thing thought about is like, this tree leaves a mess. And so we need to keep, cleaning up that thing. Just like people in their raking leaves. Off a roof or a drive, but otherwise, leave leaves on the lawn. Got to be careful throwing ashes out on top of the leaves. I have to, person. I don't. I leave the bucket out, outside, and let it simmer. I just don't throw it on the leaves. But some people will do that. Dedicatory reminds us that we do sometimes need other people's comments. To my collateral ancestor, Reverend R. Graves, the friend of the poet Shenstone, and author of the spiritual Quixote, on receipt of a press cutting intended for him, well, it sometimes gets us thinking when we get somebody else's mail, doesn't it? We can think of individuals through the mention of other individuals, and people said, I remind them of the mentalist, or I remind them of certain other individuals. And this acts, when it comes to that sort of thing, is it really a friend? Or are you just, hanging out with the version of the TV character that you could hang out with? A vehicle, to wit, a bicycle, reminds us of those sorts of things, the modern rules that aren't necessarily necessary, but, they are because they've been imposed on us. A motto to a book of emblems reminds us that artists don't leave things be. So something could be just fine. They could make it better, they could make it worse. They don't know until they go about it. The bowl and rim definitely makes you think that Robert Graves wasn't a Christian. Like, they made him their god, you know. It's like, well, yeah, but, you know, I'm surprised. Well, I guess you could get away with saying stuff like that. But in the end, the motivation, regardless of what you think about the actual story, was, you know, a pure sort of thing. A forced music can make us think of composing things through musical theory. I mean, definitely you know that when you're trying to figure out the patterns and stuff like this, but, you know, when you're trying to, you know, but it makes us think more about when art becomes something of a job. You don't do your best art just because it's like you have a deadline. Which is why, you know, the couple $1,000s you can get as a front to do a book, well, and then more money if it sells a certain number of copies past that portion, that you don't get anything further. It's better if you have the book already and then you present it, you hawk the book around. The turn of a page is something that would have been more understood before social media. I mean, people do read further in the post and all that, but a lot of people don't finish. I am well aware that a lot of my videos people do not finish. And I'm not even sure if, you know, your typical view of my videos that people actually finish them. And it's like, well, take in the whole, let them have the experience. And it's like, when it comes to a ritual particularly, it's like, finish the ritual, not just, well, they've said this thing 10 times. And it's like, but what about the rest of the ritual where there's no repetition? So if that's your issue, you know, you didn't make it. You didn't make it past the front gate. The manifestation in the temple reminds me of a story about Prophet Muhammad. He told somebody who had what, let's just call it the cloud experience. And they stopped. It's like, no, he told them, you should have continued. And so it's not that you chase away the odd experience, it's that you continue the ritual. Maybe you finish your scripture reading and you enact with what was, but you know, you just let it continue. And honestly, it does get bigger. People think, oh, you should just I've told some people, like, for example, in regards to at an OTO lodge, there were some experiences that I had at Second Ma'at in Portland. Now, I don't think they actually have the same location anymore, but I had experiences, and I did not, until the ritual at hand was over, get up and, you know, go to the places where I saw the things, even if they stayed there. And, you know, to any saint reminds us, are we really sanctifying, or are we using this against someone? A druid drop is, you know, it reminds us of the slight saving that goes on. But then again, people are like, you know, I wish this wasn't the thing. And it's like, you know, you have to eat plants and stuff like this. So a Valentine is sort of a sacrificial thing, particularly back in the day when you didn't have to give Valentines to everybody if you're going to at all. And, you know, this nonsense that they do in schools nowadays. The Witch's Cauldron reminds us that things can take time. And some things that people think may not be real, they are real, they are part of real processes. And, you know, it does help, for example, to organize a sense of symbolism regarding certain herbs and spices and plants and other things that you may use in your life. And it doesn't mean that you have to worship this particular herb or spice like some people do in their magic. The feather bed reminds us the past is the past. There's little references here and there that we can pick up and apply to our lives. Even if somebody goes into a certain profession, the conversation doesn't have to be about that. when you encounter them. I mean, if it's religion, it certainly will be at some point. I am the star of morning does sort of address the whole anti-hero aspect of Lucifer as somebody other than Jesus, according to the Easter Vigil, are 3 verses in the Bible, or, that sort of stuff. Diplomatic relations does remind us that we do have to be abrogated in some sense, but some things must be done, so we need to do them with tact. Try to adjust our outer reaction, our facial expressions and stuff when we deal with people. Hemlock reminds us that sometimes desperation to not, to have control over not taking part or taking part in a certain ending. But again, like other programs have done, I'm not recommending that sort of behavior, Full moon, like other, stages of the moon, remind us of things in our past that occurred with those times. And as light is naturally brought out in the night, again, the connections to still older forms and understanding, like it wasn't even real. Mir Renna reminds us that we do need to use what we got while we have it, and we can be pure about it. And regardless, there's a price to pay. Are efforts that have to be gone through. Twin souls reminds us that those who aren't perfect, aren't the ideals of each other, can work together. Nowadays, people say twin flames. The North Window is a Halloween poem. The start and end of things can seem to be against our own personal order. Attercop, the all-wise spider, is the view of an outsider. Plans are formed beyond our making. They can be maintained or they can be breaking. Antinomies reminds us that there are duties that we are born into. We don't really get a choice about it. Well, we do, but, we really should do things like move things or deal with estates and all that. When the work is done, it can be very satisfying. Northward from Oxford is sort of a condemnation of the art for art's sake thing, but an appreciation of the details of the planning of the landscape. Witches is based on a claim, and this claim involves Halloween. 1591 relates this to a group of Jews, or they were led by Jews, but it talks about something that's not really quite Judaism, you could say. And definitely, kind of not, and how it caused a change. It caused a change in feeling and emotion and stuff like that. It involved elements. It involved exposure. It involved music